So Hitler passed the Treachery Act, and those jokes weakened Nazi propaganda. And Hitler passed the Treachery Act of 1934, which made telling or listening to an anti-Nazi joke an act of treason punishable by imprisonment or death. That is how powerful comedy is.
My guest today is the comedian, actor, writer, and podcaster Judy Gold. Judy has had stand-up specials on HBO, Comedy Central, and Logo, and she was part of Netflix's Stand Out and LGBTQ Celebration. In addition to appearances on television shows on FX, Apple Plus, and Hulu, Judy is also a proud member of the Jewish community and participates in fundraisers in partnerships with Jewish organizations across the US. Judy's comedy pokes fun at real-life issues, including anti-Semitism, which she has no qualms about addressing in her act. Judy, thank you so much for being here. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me. My pleasure. My pleasure. Always happy to talk about this topic.
I'm really happy to have you on. We were talking and you said that how anti-Semitism is part of your act. How did you get into comedy, and how have you incorporated Judaism and anti-Semitism into your act?
Well, I've been doing stand-up for 40 years. I started on a dare when I was 19, so that's 41. Oh boy, I'm old. And being Jewish, my Judaism, which is such a big part of who I am. My mother was such a proud Jew. And my parents really shoved down our throats that everyone hates us. My father served in World War II. He was actually in London. He was stationed in Birmingham during Blitzkrieg, and he lived in oh God, I wish I had the name for you. This boarding school. It was the only boarding school that allowed Jewish kids. And his division of the army was stationed there in these dormitories. Wow. I have in my New York apartment, I have a little thingy, tchotchke from the school. But anyway, so I grew up in an observant and culturally Jewish, religiously Jewish, but very Jewish identified and very aware of anti-Semitism. I'm always this company, it was, we'd watch TV, anti-Semite, Jew, converted, it was always mentioned, and the fact that everyone hates us. Okay. So I become a comedian, and my Jewishness, is a huge part of my act. Although everyone in the business is telling me, you're too Jewish. Stop the Jewish. It's too much. And who's saying that is the Jews. The Jewish people are the ones saying don't do the Jewish, try to tone it down. I had a manager who told me to straighten my hair and dye it blonde, which I did. Wow. I looked like a newscaster. But you can't escape who you are. And it wasn't as if I was ashamed. I was proud of being a Jew. And so I didn't tone it down. And in fact, I wrote, I did a one-person show called 25 Questions for a Jewish Mother, which was a huge hit in New York. I actually did it in Montreal too. And we traveled all over the country. And it was a show I wrote with my friend Kate Moira Ryan, and it was based on interviews we did with Jewish mothers all over the country. And that was when I was just like, don't tell me to be someone I'm not. And it was funny because I came out as a lesbian in 96, and it became, okay, no, now don't do the gay stuff. It's like, no, No, I'm both.
Yeah.
Anyway, as I've gotten older and fearless, and I've don't really care what people think anymore. You get to that age, you'll get there. And the rise in anti-Semitism and the fact that we are being attacked, and it mirrors what was happening in the 30s in Germany. I can't. No, I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to shut down. Well, I see these swastikas and they don't even know what it stands for. The insurrectionists at the Capitol with the 6 million was not enough. These people are not only dumb, but they are dangerous. And as a kid, thinking my parents were overreacting all the time, I would lay in my bed, I'm thinking, never in my life will someone knock on my door and say, get out,
Yeah.
But I can imagine that now. I can imagine that. People are buying land in other countries. And I have a microphone, and I'm a Jewish comedian. I've always been a Jewish comedian, and this is an important topic. And I preface my anti-Semitism jokes with the fact that in the United States, we're 2% of the population. And in the world, we're 0.2% of 1%. 0.2% of 1%. And then go Google Nobel Prizes. See how Jews who have improved your life, this small group of people, and what they have contributed to your health and welfare and the arts and engineering and everything. And you hate us. Then you should live in the world without anything we've contributed. You got to talk about it. I feel like the more discourse about anti-Semitism, the better. And there's a thing about, being a comedian. You go hear a comedian and anyone who makes you laugh, you like them. And then you find out, oh, I thought I hated Jews, but I find her funny. I thought I hated gays, but she made me laugh. It's
right.
Yeah.
I read this Times of Israel article about you. You said that there were times when you've had to follow anti-Semites on stage. Could you tell us a bit about that? And more broadly, have you seen much anti-Semitism from fellow comedians?
I haven't. Or first of all, I've had to follow not only anti-Semitism, racism, homophobia, xenophobia, misogyny. I mean, I've been doing this a long time. Lazy jokes, lowest common denominator. And that is just something that happens when you're a comic, especially up and coming. When club bookers used to not curate the shows so that, it was, oh, this person works well with that person. It was just like, who's going to bring in, we have this one headlining, let's get some cheap acts to open. So that's part one. What was the second question that I wanted to answer first? And now I forgot because I'm 60.
Oh, it was whether you have seen anti-Semitism in comedy more broadly.
So what's interesting now is I now see the Jewish comedians not talking about being Jewish. And so when I see someone saying I'm a Jew, I'm so grateful. And on the other hand, being an out lesbian in the straight clubs when I was coming up, I was working in the mainstream clubs. I had established myself. And then once I had a child, I started talking about my relationship and my kid and being a same-sex parent, which was, by the way, very palatable, I came out because of my kid, but it made it easier for me to come out because it was easier for people to, oh, that's a family and this is funny and what they have to go through, Um, but I noticed that there are comedians who just don't bring it up. It used to be, oh, I'm a Jew, so I blah, blah. There's not a lot of that. So when I do see a comedian who talks about being Jewish, I am so excited. And on the other hand, when I see a gay person who doesn't even have to come out, or a trans person who gets on stage now and it's not even an issue. It's not even an issue. Those are the two sides of the coin. I mean, I used to see a palpable shift in the audience when they realized I was gay. They were like, oh, wait, like you would see them like, oh, but yeah, I've seen people talking a lot less about their Judaism. And then again, I see other people doubling down on it.
Right. Right. Well, being Jewish and anti-Semitism, like you say, is a big part of your act. I wanted to ask you about this idea in comedy that comedians should punch up rather than punch down, which is, I suppose, to say that jokes should be aimed at those carrying out harm rather than aimed towards the victims of it. And I was wondering what you thought about this and how it relates to anti-Semitism in comedy.
Well, there's this idea of punching up and punching down. And when it comes to comedy, what exactly is that? Punching down to me is like an easy, lazy, not funny. It's not comedy. You can joke about anything. I have jokes about the Holocaust, but they're good, well thought out, well crafted jokes that make you think. If you're going to take the easy way out and just disparage people, just to disparage people and get a laugh, that's not comedy to me. And you could say, Dave Chappelle is punching down. But Dave Chappelle, very funny guy. I don't understand his obsession with trans people. I don't understand why anyone would do a whole special about, or devote that, like, what is your obsession with them? And also, I'm not into comparing horror stories of our past, like we had it worse than you had it, but that being said, I do think the Jews have had it really bad since the beginning of time. And I don't shun, I think in our country, the racism is beyond horrible. And yeah, so there's this idea of punching up and there's an idea of punching down. Punching up to me is real comedy. Is George Carlin, speaking truth to power. He hated the punching down. It's I can curse on this, right?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So, Lenny Bruce said, take away, which is what's happening now with the censorship, take away the right to say f***, and you take away the right to say f*** the government. And that is exactly punching up. Someone will use that word as a punchline, which is not, but f*** the government is a point you're trying to make,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's really, we are truth tellers. We are the truth tellers. And let me tell you something. Jews have used comedy as a weapon, as a coping mechanism, as a way to say, hey, to disarm people. It's a powerful weapon. I mean, Mark Twain said, under the assault of laughter, nothing can stand. Because it is humiliation. You can have whatever weapon you want, but humiliation is extremely powerful. And I don't know if a lot of people know this, but when during the rise of the Third Reich, okay, that was me doing, it was comedians who were getting on stage and telling the truth about what was really happening in Germany. They were speaking the truth to power, which is one of the things a comedian does. And so Hitler passed the Treachery Act. And, those jokes weakened Nazi propaganda. And Hitler passed the Treachery Act of 1934, which made telling or listening to an anti-Nazi joke an act of treason punishable by imprisonment or death. That is how powerful comedy is. And Jews, the way we are taught to think, I believe, really feeds into the way a comedian thinks. It's arguing. There's still people sitting in a room right now talking about some Talmudic passage that's been talked about for thousands, and they're still arguing about it,
Yeah.
And it is the way we are taught, even the way we speak with the questioning. Oh, it's not gonna, like I don't even have to say words. And it's like, oh, I'm doing, and you get it. And, we have used comedy to assimilate. And it's something that's I think it's a huge part of our culture. Every rabbi, when they get a laugh, first of all, you got to bar bat mitzvah, right? Or b mitzvah now.
Yeah.
But and the first line is always like some sort of joke to disarm the audience, right? And it is a tool. And people who are full of hate don't want to be disarmed. Because their hate is their armor.
Yeah. When you're on stage and you're joking about anti-Semitism, what have some of the reactions been, both good or bad?
It's funny. It's such a good question because, there's this whole idea when you're a comedian of the line, crossing the line. And George Carlin said, I like to find out where the line is, cross it deliberately, and then make the audience happy that I did. And for me, the line is when I'm doing material, especially about Jews and anti-Semitism, and I think they're laughing for the wrong reason. That's my line. And, people are like, how can you tell? You can tell, believe me. But I challenge them. I'll talk about anti-Semitism and how everyone hates us and the way, I have many funny jokes that are just based in the truth that have made Jews uncomfortable. And when I talk about Israel, that is really a hot button issue. But the way I talk about it is in a way, because I've been there now 3 times and I've had such an incredible experiences that you can tell. I've asked people in the audience, you seem to not, why are you making a face when I talk about Israel? And they're like, I said, you don't like Israel? Yeah. No. And I'm like, why? This literally happened in Washington, D.C. I said, why? And this guy said, something with the Palestinians. Like, that is where comedy goes to die, and intellectual, and it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating. But I see like Gary Goldman, who I love. He's a great comic, talking about what Jews have invented. I mean, there's ways of talking about anti-Semitism in a way that is hilarious and enlightening. And I see great comics like Gary doing that. I mean, I've posted things like, you hate the Jews, then throw out your cell phone. Don't get a heart transplant. Don't drink your water. Come on,
Yeah.
people. That whole idea of tikkun olam, we take that seriously. We don't say, oh my God, you hate Jews? Well, then you know what? Don't, you can't have this, or you can't listen to that, or you can't eat that, or wear
Yeah.
that, or go see this play or this show or this musician. It's ridiculous. And it's
Mm.
such an old hate, but you
Yeah.
have to talk about it.
For sure, for sure. And that kind of leads me to ask you, have you ever found yourself writing material about Jews or anti-Semitism, and you feel like you have the point or the statement, but you don't have the joke yet?
Yes, all the time. So I'll write it down. I do that all the time, like something funny about the fact that blank. And I bring it on stage and I start talking it out. Lots of times I'll sit and try to just write like off the top of my head and something comes out. But it's really for me, I write these topics down because, you get to a point where I could get up there and just, there's plenty of comics who get up there and they're just funny. They're just talking about non-threatening observational things. And you know what? Good for them. They are lucky enough to have that taking control. That's what they think about. And I think of them as very lucky. But when you are a Jew, a woman, a lesbian in this society, I don't have the pleasure of just like, hey, isn't it funny how, the flower blooms and then it dies, and like, I don't have, that's not what
Yeah.
occupies my mind. And I feel like, as I get older, I it's just what I think about all the time, and I can't, the ridiculousness of it. Yeah. And the hypocrisy, it's so, and let me tell you something. When you take, I'll say something. You asked me about, pushback from the audience. That's on them. That is on them. If you take my intent, you take that out of the equation, you have nothing. You're hearing something not the way the writer or performer intended it, the way you're going to take it. That word offends me. I can't listen to the rest. Oh my God, I can't believe she mentioned that event in history. That's it. You're done. Don't go to a comedy club if you're going to sit there like that. When you take out context, nuance, and intent, like, look, in the United States, if you murder someone, right, and then you go on trial for homicide, your sentence is determined by your intent, what you were thinking. Did you mean to do, give a comedian the same consideration.
Mm. Yeah. I got to ask, you perform for sometimes Jewish audiences. Do you find yourself adjusting the material for Jewish and non-Jewish audiences in terms
Well,
of anti-Semitism?
absolutely. First of all, there's so many jokes I can do in front of a Jewish audience where I don't have to explain, like the word parv.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just so many inside things. I have traveled all over for so many years. And my father died when I was 27. And that year, wherever I went to say Mourner's Cottage on Saturday morning. And
Wow.
it was such an incredible thing because I'd be in the middle of nowhere and I'd find a synagogue and I'm looking around. I'm like, oh, these are the same songs we sing. I know exactly what's in their refrigerator. We are, I know what you're doing afterwards. It was the most, it was like an epiphany of how wherever we are, like we're all there. We're one sort of community. And it's even more fascinating when you go overseas and you're like, oh my God, like I don't know. We have this language, so I can get away with talking about things that I don't have to explain to a Jewish audience. But then there's also, like I do a lot of corporate Jewish gigs. I can't curse. I can't, oh my God, this is the best. And I've done a bunch of these where they're like, oh, we want you to perform for our, sisterhood gala or our synagogue, whatever, big fundraiser. And I'm on the bima. I'm on the bima with the Torahs behind me.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, what? I can't. What am I? And I just always turn around. I'm like, sorry. I mean, it's funny. Because we have this unspoken bond and this unspoken, when you meet a Jew and you're like, you can tell a Jew. You can see him across the friggin' room. That feeling of like, okay, there's another one of me here. And you know what the greatest thing about Jews and comedy is that they love, we started stand up, we in the Catskills, every fundraise, thank God for the Jews, or I would make, and so many other comedians would make a very horrible living, but they embrace that.
Yeah.
Or we embrace it. Yeah.
Do you have any plans to come to London? Because I think the Jewish community here would.
Oh my God, I want to come there. I want to come there so bad. I was there in the 80s. I had just started doing stand up, and they were so mean to me. Like, I was new. No. I was very raw, but I have been dying to come there. I really, and especially with my father was an Anglophile and that he had lived there and it was such a big part of his life. And, I really want to come there and perform.
Yeah. Well, let me know if you do. We'll hook you up with a nice kiddish spread.
Thank you. Challah, 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 challah.
So, I mean, look, in addition to calling out anti-Semitism in your act, you're very vocal about it on social media. And you've said in interviews before that you receive a lot of anti-Semitism on social media as well. Is this something that affects you, or can you just brush it off, or how do you handle it?
It's so funny that you ask that, because when I tell people that, they're shocked. I don't get anti-gay stuff, but I get blatant, horrible anti-Semitism. And my assistant was like, I'm just deleting them. I said, no, I want them. And they're just disgusting and old tropes. And it's, it makes me angry, but it really makes me sad. And, victims of the Holocaust, there's so few left. And it concerns me, but I feel like I need to see them. It fires me up. It makes me want to talk more about it. It makes me want to call these people out. But yes, over 90% of my hate mail is anti-Semitic.
I got to ask you about your comedic influences. You've said that one of your biggest influences is Joan Rivers, who's a personal favorite of mine as well. What do you think Joan Rivers did for Jews in comedy?
Oh my God. Let me tell you something. I just did Melissa's podcast, and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe it. And she was like, shut up. Joan Rivers, first of all, was brilliant. And the thing that I find so, I don't want to use the word fascinating, but it is kind of fascinating. Here's this first of all, she's a short, Jewish, very smart woman. Very smart, very well educated, very well read, classy. When she was in college, she went down to the Village and saw Lenny Bruce. And this is an old story, and she had an epiphany. She said he was saying the truth on stage and making it funny. Total truth, but it was funny. And she also said that when she was a little girl, there were no female stand-ups that she could point to and say, that's what I want to do. So she sees this guy, and she then, for 50 years, does the exact same thing. And the thing about Joan was she was unabashedly Jewish. She was inappropriate. She was fearless. She was classy. She was smarter. She was the smartest one in the room. And here's this guy, Johnny Carson from Nebraska, who couldn't be more geisha and white, who thinks here's this guy who is middle America thinking this woman is like otherworldly. And I remember as a kid watching Joan. I also loved Toady Fields, by the way, who died very young, but she died at 48. But she was also fearless. And there were other comedians, but those two really had a profound effect on me. Jean Carroll was really the first female straight stand-up, and she was Jewish. But a lot of people don't know about her. But Joan and Toady they said the stuff you weren't supposed to say. And they got away with it because they were so brilliantly funny and likable. And you knew, and vulnerable. There's this idea of caustic vulnerability. And Don Rickles is sitting, another phenomenon. Here's this guy who, if you were in his audience and he didn't single you out and mock the crap out of you, you were like, oh, I can't believe he didn't abuse me. I mean, can you imagine today? And his whole point was that, oh, you're this, you're that. We're all the same. Give me a hug. Like, it was just pointing out the nonsense that everyone thinks about everyone. And it was so hysterical, but it would never fly today. And Joan, for the 5 decades she was in stand-up, you knew exactly where women stood. She talked about things before anyone else. Divorce, plastic surgery. Actually, Phyllis Diller talked about plastic surgery before I think anyone else and was very proud of it. But when her husband Edgar died, she talked about his suicide. She did not shy away from anything. Nothing was precious. She was there for the joke. And if you didn't get it, then too bad. And never gave up. The work ethic of, I don't know, a Sherpa. I mean, it's just, she was such an influence. And I remember watching her with my parents, both of us laughing, like, when do you have the same taste as your parents? My parents were in their 40s when they had me. My father was almost 50 when he had me. And here we are hysterically laughing at this brash Jewish woman. And it's like watching her as a kid going, wow. You know what? I don't have to be ladylike and docile,
Yeah.
I can have a sharp tongue. But she really, and when she died, Chris Rock said she was the Mount Rushmore of comedy. Now, Chris Rock, who came from a completely different background than Joan Rivers, she had such a profound effect on so many comedians. And her memorial service, I can't even tell you. It was literally 1 minute I'm hysterically laughing, the next minute I'm hysterically crying. And she was the GOAT for me.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people as well.
Yeah.
As we begin to wind down now, I'm going to ask you a question that I ask all of our guests, which is, if someone who is not Jewish comes to you and says that they want to help in the fight against anti-Semitism, where should they start?
They should speak out. Anytime someone says anything remotely anti-Semitic, You have to call them out. If you have a big social media following, you have to post. If you read the newspaper and you see something that happened, post about it. Did you read this? Did you see this? Even writing Fight Anti-Semitism, show us that you're our ally. Don't let anyone get away with any sort of slight. We have to have more discourse, not less. Do not be silent. Do not be silent.
Yeah.
Can we plug my book, by the way? We didn't plug my book.
No, my absolute next question is going to be,
good.
please tell the listeners, what have you got going on? What have you got coming up? And where can people find you?
Oh, God, I love you. Okay, so I'm on the socials at Judy Gold, JEWDYGOLD,
Nice.
which I've also gotten crap for. And it's like, I am a proud Jew. So that's on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok and now Threads. So I'm at Judy Gold, but I have a website, judygold.com, JUDYGOLD.com. And I wrote a book that came out in 2020, and it's called Yes, I Can Say That When They Come for the Comedians, We're All in Trouble. And it's all about free speech through the perspective of a comedian. It's a very Jewish book. It talks a lot about the history of comedy, a lot about Joan, but a lot about, the way politicians, aka Trump, get away with saying this horrible crap, and yet comedians, they say one thing that offends you and they should never be able to perform again. So I have that book, and that book, Yes, I Can Say That, we did a solo show at off-Broadway, directed by B.D. Wong, written with my friend Eddie Sarfati, and it was a hit. We did it in March and April, and we are going to be taking that show on tour and hopefully coming to London. And it's all about, free speech and this call to action and anti-Semitism. A lot about anti-Semitism. I'm going to the Montreal Comedy Festival. But right now I'm in Provincetown, Massachusetts, where I live, and I do a residency all summer, and I try out new material, and it's just fantastic. So just go to judygold.com and you'll see where I am, and follow me and buy my book and just love me. That's all I ever ask is
Well, look, if you bring your show to London, I will be there. Judy Gold, thank you so much for coming on Podcast Against Anti-Semitism.
Thank you for having me. It was my pleasure, and let's keep up the fight.